So now that Suzuki, in his introduction to the Lankavatara Sutra, has commented upon several other of the Mahayana sutras, I think what he's doing now is sort of re-reviewing the essential points within the Lanka. And it's interesting that at the beginning of this recitation, here in his introduction, he talks about the awakening of faith in the Mahayana, generally ascribed to Asvagosha. And what you will perhaps be aware of is that this awakening of faith is the scripture that was most focused on by Tsong Mi, who was in a video which I recently uploaded, and one that I plan to do some excerpted recitation from. So what Suzuki says is, there is no doubt that the Lanka is closely connected in time as well as doctrine with the awakening of faith in the Mahayana, generally ascribed to Asvagosha. While he may not have been the author of this most important treatise of Mahayana philosophy, there was surely a great Buddhist mind who, inspired by the same spirit which pervades the Lanka, the Avatamsaka, the Parinirvana Sutra, etc., poured out his thoughts in The Awakening. Some scholars contend that The Awakening is a Chinese work, but this is not well grounded. In a way, The Awakening is an attempt to systematize the Lanka, for all the principal teachings of the latter are found there developed in due order. And you'll remember that he characterizes the Lankavatara as sort of being a conglomeration of notes and rather unorganized in that regard. So again, the Awakening of Faith presents this mind-only doctrine in a more systematic manner. As far as the theoretical side is concerned, both teach the existence of the Garbha as ultimate reality. And I think the term may be in the Awakening of Faith, and perhaps even in the Lanka, the Tathagata Garbha, or the womb. While this lies in ordinary people defiled by the evil passions and does not shine out in its native purity, we cannot deny its existence in them. When the external wrappage of impurities is peeled off, we all become Buddhas and Tathagatas. So as I understand it, this Tathagata Garbha has at times the characteristics of being defiled, but at times has an underlying purity that can be intuitively perceived. In fact, the birth of a Tathagata is nowhere else than in this Garbha. So in that sense, maybe we can think of this Tathagata Garbha or Garbha as the Buddha nature that exists within all of us. He goes on to say, the Garbha is, from a psychological point of view, the alaya vijnana, or all-conserving mind, in which good and bad are mingled, and the work of the yogin, that is, one who seeks the truth by means of self-discipline, is to separate the one from the other. Why is the alaya found contaminated by evil thoughts and desires? What is the evil? How does it come out in this world? How is the truth to be realized? These questions are answered by postulating a system of vijnanas and by the doctrine of discrimination, or vikalpa, as has already been expounded above. This is the point where the Lanka comes in contact with the Yogacara or Yogacara school. The Yogacara is essentially psychological standing, in contrast in this respect to the Madhyamaka school, which is epistemological. And the Madhyamaka or Madhyamika school is, of course, the school, I believe, founded by Nagarjuna, which puts its emphasis on emptiness rather than on the more positive notion of suchness or mind only. But the alaya vijnana of the Yogacara is not the same as that of the Lanka and the Awakening of Faith. The former conceives the alaya to be purity itself, with nothing defiled in it, whereas the Lanka and the Awakening make it the cause of purity and defilement. Further, the Yogacara upholds the theory of Vijnapti Matra, and not that of Sita Matra, which belongs to the Lanka, Avatamsaka, and Awakening of Faith. And I think Sita Mantra is mind only. The difference is this. According to the Vijnapti Matra, the world is nothing but ideas. There are no realities behind them. But the Sita Matra states that there is nothing but Sita, mind, in the world, and that the world is the objectification of mind. The one is pure idealism, which I think is consistent with some of the philosophies in the West, and the other, idealistic realism. I'm not sure I can explain exactly what that means, but I think it means that the Lanka would acknowledge that, in a certain sense, to realize the Sita mantra is the object of the Lanka, and this is done when discrimination is discarded. That is, when a state of non-discrimination is attained in one's spiritual life. So again, this is relating to a dualistic perspective that through an intuitive process can be transcended by the devotee. Discrimination is a logical term and belongs to the intellect. Thus we see that the end of the religious discipline is to go beyond intellectualism, for to discriminate or to divide is the function of the intellect. Logic does not lead one to self-realization. Hence, Nagarjuna's hair-splitting dialectics. His idea is to prove the ineffectiveness of logic in the domain of our spiritual life. This is where the Lanka joins hands with the Madhyamaka. The doctrine of the void is indeed the foundation of Mahayana philosophy. So emptiness, again, sunya or sunyata, which is the experience of prajna or wisdom, is fundamental to Mahayana Buddhism. But this is not to be understood in the manner of analytical reasoning. The Lanka is quite explicit and not to be mistaken in this respect. So far, the Lanka may seem to be only a philosophical treatise with nothing religious in it, but the fact is that the sutra is deeply tinged with religious sentiments. For instance, the Bodhisattva would not enter into nirvana because of his vows to save all sentient beings, and his vows are not limited in time and space, and for this reason they are called inexhaustible. Not only are his vows inexhaustible, but the, quote, skillful means he uses for the emancipation of all beings know no limits. He knows how to make the best use of his inexhaustible resources, intellectual and practical, for this single purpose. Here we may say that the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra of the Avatamsaka, or the Ganda Vyuha, which is the last portion of the Avatamsaka, is reflected. Again, here we may say that the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra of the Avatamsaka, or the Ganda Vyuha, is reflected. In the Lanka, all the most fundamental conceptions of the Mahayana are thrown in without any attempt on the part of the compiler or compilers to give them a system. This is left to the thoughtful reader himself, who will pick them up from the medley and string them into a garland of pearls out of his own religious experience. And my hope for those listening to the recitation of the various pieces of the Lanka is that you can do exactly that. So this is as far as I'm going to go with the introduction to the Lankavatara Sutra written by D.T. Suzuki. Again, I may read more sections from his studies in the Lankavatara, but at this point I will end with encouragement to those of you who have an interest to actually get a copy of the Lankavatara Sutra, maybe even follow along with the recitation, but by all means expose yourself to various pieces of the Lankavatara Sutra, which has many profound notions, both in terms of ways of thinking about ourselves in reality, as well as ways of helping to facilitate our progress on the spiritual path from a meaningful spiritual perspective.